Don't ever burn bridges. Not in this industry. And I don't think too many people do, because you, just as I made mention, you're going to need help somewhere, somehow. And, be decent, be kind, do everything above table. And it'll all be okay.
Hello, and welcome to the Elevator Careers Podcast, sponsored by the Allred Group. I am your host, Matt Allred. In this podcast, we talk to the people whose lives and careers are dedicated to the vertical transportation industry to inform and share lessons learned, building upon the foundation of those who have gone before to inspire the next generation of elevator careers. Today, our guest is Rick Milefchik, Chief Operating Officer of Access Elevator Supply in San Francisco and Quality Elevator Products in Chicago. Rick started in the industry in 1981 with Montgomery Elevator as a 16-year-old high school student and grew from there. He spent 32 years with Montgomery, Kone, and 8 more with ECS Corporation before taking on his current role. Rick met his wife of 33 plus years at Montgomery, and his 3 children work for him today at AES and QEP. Rick has accomplished much in his career, and all without ever leaving his hometown. Rick, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Thank you. I'm excited to have you. I'm excited to be able to talk to you about your elevator career. I know you've been at it for a little while, and I always love to start by just saying, how did you get started in the elevator industry?
Well, I was a 16-year-old kid at Moline High School in the summertime, in between my sophomore and junior year, as part of a co-op program. And the instructor for that particular class called and said, "Hey, I need you to go down to Montgomery Elevator and fill out some paperwork. We've got an opening for you that you can go in the afternoons after class and such, or start now. And then once school starts, you go in after class." And so I started as in between those, my sophomore, junior year, 16 years old, pushing a mail cart at
Wow.
Montgomery
So
Elevator.
summer job, right? It was school's out and.
Well, it was a summer job, and then it was part of a work program that basically I ended up with, a general elective credits for basically working in the afternoons once school got back in. And so it's kind of started there back in 1981. So
That's awesome. With a mail cart. And you said between sophomore and junior. So did you continue all the way through high school?
yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And well, frankly, and then never left. I shouldn't say up until 2013. So
Right.
but
So
yeah,
all told, you were that you said 81 to 2013. That's 30 plus years there, right?
32 years at Montgomery and Kone. Yeah.
That's
Mhm.
awesome. That's
Yeah,
awesome.
well, a wonderful place. And it's funny, I sit back and I think, there was a time, when I was younger, and you think, oh, pushing a mail cart, what's so special about that? But so many things as I look back. I had the opportunity to walk into the offices of every senior manager at Montgomery Elevator,
Sure.
and 3 times a day, and listen and observe. And you heard how they talk to people, but you saw how they talked to me and they treated me. And really was a wonderful opportunity and experience to see this collection of people and leaders that really, in that time frame in 1980s, where Montgomery grew at perhaps its most accelerated pace, to
Right.
see the varying personalities and approaches to how they did business and how they treated people. And it was really kind of a launch pad into, like, yeah, this is neat, this is cool stuff, I'd like to do this. And
Right.
so, it was a whole, like I said, a whole lot more than just, turned out to be a whole lot more than just like you said, a summer job.
Yeah. Well, and how long before it really started to click with you? And obviously mail cart is very different from, actually working in the trade or
Right.
but
Oh, within that first year, only because like I said, I got to interact with, and this was from the chairman of the board of Montgomery to the president, senior VP of finance, and then field operations, accounting, all the entire senior management team, not to mention all the employees, because it was there at the headquarters.
Right.
And just a fascinating group of people that really were wonderful people. And it was like, this is, I didn't really grasp the industry per se,
Sure.
but just the interactions of what they did and seeing a level of urgency. You could tell in these people that there were days that, hey, okay, they were joking one day, and then there were some things that got hot, and
Sure.
how they dealt with that was pretty fascinating, and it was something I had not experienced before. So pretty intriguing.
Yeah. 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 So you did that for a couple of years. How long before you actually graduated from the mail cart?
I was there basically, it would have been 2 years, and then went over to Montgomery is what they called PDC, which is the Parts Distribution Center, and went
Okay.
over as a parts handler, working and pulling parts and that. And that's what's funny is, it's my wife can send me to the store here and ask me to get three things, and I'll text her when I get there and remember ask what was the other two.
That's me.
But
Yeah.
I can go back to 1983 now, and I can still remember the first three part numbers that I ever pulled.
Wow.
There
The
were
actual
four.
numbers, not just the parts, but you're talking about the numbers.
Yeah, 41782 plunger, 2881 192 spring, and a 16929 solenoid. They were going to Montgomery and Omaha.
Wow.
I can still see the pick ticket. And that was, I did that for, gosh, on and off for a few years. But in the midst of that, I also accepted a role that was at the time was called inventory verifier, where I would
Okay.
go out to the Montgomery branch network, which was really an incredibly strong unit of well-trained people,
Right.
and do physical inventories.
Wow.
Uh, and then whenever Montgomery would be involved in any type of an acquisition, I would go out and I would do the inventory of the components. So that was really my first, those two things were the first uh, um, introduction to parts and the variation of parts and such, and the way people bought them, the way they stocked them, things to that effect. So that was really valuable, because the other piece that was kind of that was good for me in that traveling part was going to the Montgomery branches. At that time, the branch was comprised of a manager, who oversaw construction. He oversaw service. He
Sure.
sales. Everything was under that umbrella. And today you've got the vertical lines of business in most of the companies, where you have service equipment, new equipment, you have
Sure.
modernization. Whatever the models are in various companies. But there it was one guy holding that umbrella, and everything was underneath it. And you know, really got to see and experience what these people at the field level went through, because oftentimes, admittedly, you get a phone call and it's like, oh my God, this guy is, so, he's bouncing off the wall. What's his problem?
Right.
And you're just thinking he's just unreasonable and impatient. Well, then you go out and see what they deal with, and, really trying to look at things through somebody else's eyes, just incredibly enlightening,
Sure.
and gave a whole different perspective on how I needed to do my job when I got back to the office. Because again, let me back up, because also during that time, I then moved into the office,
Okay.
uh, into what they called their service department. Well, their service department was essentially identifying componentry that the branches needed if
Gotcha.
they didn't have it. So I had to go through job listings and listing tickets and engineering folders and such, to help identify componentry. And that's where it was like, okay, it gave me a different perspective on how to do that, and appreciation for what was needed. Because when you're just looking at a part, or you're just taking a phone call from a guy who sounds like he's stressed,
Right.
it's like, man, come on, everything's fine.
Right.
And
Well, you're looking at the spring going, dude, it's just a spring. I mean, how big of a deal can this be? But to him, if it's holding up a job or
well, and that's it. And so I look back, and each one of these things that I did gave me a little bit more of a strong foundational block to build off of and learn from.
Right.
And I can't say that I understood the magnitude of it at the time. But looking back, it was like it all pieced together into a really, really wonderful library of knowledge and experience that I don't think we get today, or that young people have as strong of an opportunity today, because the experience level isn't out in the field like it once was.
Sure.
Um, and the structure is so fast paced today that people don't really have the time to learn like they did.
Right. Okay.
I was afforded the opportunity to have people sit with me and say, get over here and sit down, and
Sure.
you're going to learn this because I'm tired of telling you. That's really, that's how I was taught too.
Sure.
And today it's just like, man, I got to have it. I got to have it, and you got so many people depending upon it.
Right.
It's a different world today. So,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Who were some of your biggest mentors? I mean, sounds like certainly a steep learning curve, but you were kind of just dove in, right? All in and learning. Who were
oh
some of
yeah,
those that helped
I
you?
think, again, back to the days in the mailroom, probably one of the best and genuine, kindest people I've ever met was Jerry Hank, who was the chairman of the board of Montgomery.
Wow.
Here I was a punk kid, dropping off and picking up mail, and here's a guy that, this was his company,
Sure.
and at the time, largest escalator company in the world, and you know, asking me to sit down on his couch and, how you doing? What do you think? He was a big supporter of Notre Dame, and
Sure.
what do you think the Irish are going to do? Just to sit down, and I'm thinking, here, this guy doesn't have to do this, but he chose to do this, and
Right.
he did it with so many people, and so seeing how you treat people was, again, immense appreciation for that man.
Yeah.
Uh, Operationally, and then also the way people were treated, I would say, John Jaster, who was a boss of mine on and off over the years from the time I entered the parts operation at Montgomery. His role at the time was VP of service operations, and that the parts operation fell under
Okay.
his umbrella. He was not a touchy feely guy. He was pretty, quite unfriendly, frankly. But again, knowing that time and the way things worked and the dynamics of what went on and how it had to get done, he was the guy dealing on the service side with the field people, and he was tough and had to be tough.
Sure.
What was so although at that time I didn't work so much with him as much as was cognizant of him and his role in our operation. Over the years, though, when I did work for him, I was able to see a guy who was tough as nails and always was, but went from being kind of a rigid guy to transform into perhaps one of the greatest motivators I've ever seen and experienced in my entire career. Um,
Tell me
so,
more about that. How he would motivate.
he was just he was very theatrical, in a way that he was a storyteller,
Okay.
and he would tell a story in a way that, okay, if you don't get what's on the Proxima, if you don't get what's on the report I sent you, let me tell you about this. And he would, one small little story that was really, really, it was stunning, yet in hindsight, it was funny, but yet very impacting. We had issues when he first came back to Kone Spares, and we were dealing with a number of credit issues. And John had just left the role of, where he started the quality program at
Okay.
Kone. So
Mhm.
everywhere he went, he turned something around and it took off like a rocket. He
Wow.
was the epitome of success,
Right.
or a driver of success, I should say. And we had some issues with, okay, credits, and they were things they could have been shipping errors, they could have been sales errors, an entry error, could have been a number of things. Well, he wanted to know why, what happened? Well, entered it wrong. Why? How'd that happen? and it was like, okay, painful. This is like pulling teeth now, man. That's the same question, same answer. Well, we had to have meetings every week, every single week. And to go over anything that happened, we had to explain it, what happened. And it was like, okay, this is just trudging,
Sure.
along several months after this all ended. He says the point was for this to be painful that you would figure out how to get out of these meetings by correcting the problem.
Right.
In one of the meetings, one of the folks came loaded for bear, and she had all of her facts that, hey, we've got this percentile rate, we've got a 98, 96% fill rate, so on and so forth. The numbers were, she just came loaded with data. And he says, wow, he says, I got this all wrong. He said 96% accuracy rate on 500 packages, so on and so forth. So he's up there and he's motioning like, okay, let me think this through. He's playing it out, and everybody's like, yeah, way to go. You got him. We're all getting sucked into his world here. And he says, let me just think about this. He says, I think we ought to do this. He says, I guess I had this all wrong. We need a marketing plan for this. I want this message put in postcards that we send out. I want them put in packages that go out the door. He says, I want it on our website. He says, I want this in front of every single customer. We do those signature things at the bottom of emails, right? Let's put it there. So he's going on, and everybody's like, okay, what are we going to do? He says, I want it. He's got his back to everybody, like he's motioning on how he's looking like he would want it on a board.
Right.
And he whipped around. He says, here's what I want you to say. He says, you said 96%, right? And she says, yep, 96%. He says, okay. He says, the message is to every customer that 4% of the time we're going to screw up your day. 4% of the time we're going to send you incorrect parts. We're going to send you damaged parts. We might not even put anything in the box. He said, so 4% of the time you can count on our operation to make your day miserable. He says, that's unacceptable. And we were like, okay, but then the hammer came down when he said, I expect perfection.
Yeah.
He says, am I going to get it? He says, no. He says, but if you deliver anything less than that effort, you cannot work for me.
Yeah.
So it was humorous. It was theatrical. It was a 6-7 minute drawn out, production that ended with a massive explanation or exclamation point that, no, this isn't good enough.
Right.
And
We can't just shoot for 96% and call it,
yeah,
call
and
it
the beauty of it is what he did then, though. If he would have stopped there, that would have been moving enough. But he went and he actually sat down or got down on his knee next to this lady, and he says, I love your guys. He says, your guys do an awesome job. He says, and they work fantastic. He says, but we have to be better. He says, the customer expects us to be better.
Sure.
And so he did all this, but then he came back with a very humanistic side. And, he was also just one of the biggest defenders of people. He would be, he would, if he used he had a motto of trust granted.
Sure.
Like, what, if you've never given me a reason to not trust you, he says, I will have your back. You do what you need to do. He says, I'll support you. He says, now, if there's something not right with that, you and I will have a discussion separately. But he says, to the outside world, he says, I represent, you represent me, I represent you. He says, so we're going to soar together. We're going to burn together. So, he was just really, really remarkable. So
that's really cool. Do you have any experiences where you saw trust granted, that motto being played out?
Oh yeah. I actually, again, in my early days in sales, I did a really dumb thing. We had a customer that had not been a customer, and they had no history, but they were a broker for the servicing company out in New York that needed to buy 2 units worth of chain for power walks. Well, we needed the money up front. Well, they're long power walks, and power walk it's expensive chain.
Sure.
And it turned out I think ended up being I think it was a little over $80,000,
Wow.
and had to get all the money up front. Well, they were scheduling the 2 units out over a period of time. And so we delivered the first unit. Well, they said, well, here, we want to pay for all of it. Well, again, being naive at that time, we processed the billing for both units. We got the money, we processed the billing. Well, when they did an inventory, we find, okay, why do we have all this chain? Because we only
Right.
shipped one unit. And, that kind of a discrepancy on the accounting side of that much money, it flew up the flagpole pretty quick and said, hey, what's going on? And why did you guys take credit for a sale that you didn't ship?
Right.
Well, in the Kone world, which is a very proper world, hey, that's deemed unethical.
Right.
And so I got called in and wanted to know, hey, what do we do here, so on and so forth. And boy, he knew nothing about other than just the numbers, but he didn't know any of the history. And absolutely no way. This guy would not do this. This guy would not. I've never seen anything like this. He says, basically, he went to bat for me before he heard anything about my story. And when I explained it to him, he's okay. He says, I see where your thinking was. He says, I get it. He says, so this validates his support for me. Now, to my point earlier, when all that was done, okay, it was fine. Everything was taken care of. I got to have another meeting with him though. and
Right.
and that one was a little more hard line. He says, do not ever put me in that situation again. He
Right.
says, he says, I believe you. He says, I'm not questioning. He says, you and your motives or your tactics. He says, but he says, you better get your head on straight. He says, and you got to figure out how things are done, and so, but yeah, he was just, and he did that in other areas where there were issues with suppliers and with other employees that, things that were perceived as being, oh, well, we should have done this, and they said they would do, but they didn't. And if anybody on our team said, no, that's not an accurate statement, that was the train that he got on and rode. It was, nope, these are my people. I'm responsible for them. And what they say is accurate.
Wow.
And
Wow. Yeah.
and one last thing about him is we were being pushed to go to a global website, and he was adamant. He says no. He says that's not going to work. He says we're not going to do that over here. And of course, he was one of the last ones that was from the Montgomery
Sure.
VP that rolled into the Kone world, and he was suddenly, he was a player in a larger game now, and he had his convictions, had his beliefs, and listened to his people, and basically was willing to go toe to toe with anybody. If his people said that was what was right for the business, then he would fight for that. So,
Sure.
but he also was smart enough to know when not to fight. I mean,
Sure.
there were things that he, like I said, he'd go toe to toe with anybody if the fight was worth it, and at the same time, if it wasn't, and he would pick a different battle to win at a different day, and or a battle to fight that he would win on a different day. But he was not, he didn't go looking for anything like that. He was just a smart guy, and but like I said, very motivational. Went from a rigid guy, not really talkative, to just a real rah guy by the time he was done. And he left about 30 days after I left Kone.
Okay. Yeah.
And that would I have left had he stayed? Don't know. I mean, that would have been, but it made the choice of me taking on another role very much easier, knowing he wasn't going to be there. So
Yeah. It sounds like you had a huge impact on your growth, your development, your career,
yeah,
all the way
absolutely.
through.
Tremendous.
Yeah. So back to your career for a minute, you mentioned, joining the parts department, the service department. Where did you go from there?
That's when I started into the sales group. I went over to the MAC division, molding accessories,
Okay.
the door operator division. And at that time, they were starting to launch they were getting more into parts sales. They were
Okay.
turning into a parts arm, far beyond just door equipment. And I was the one that kind of brought the escalator insight to that, because over the previous years there on the Montgomery side, I kind of started to become the escalator guy. If there were problems with escalators or identifying escalator parts, I was the one to figure that out. Now, I couldn't tell them how to work on them or troubleshoot them, but I was the guy that, when it came to the identification and the types of units and such, that kind of clicked with me. So that was the area that at MAC, that was my primary role there. While they were still focused heavily on door operators and door equipment, mine was mainly the parts, specifically and the escalator parts.
Mhm.
So, and then from there, once Kone went to the one Kone name, the global um, identification, and we became Kone spares. I was the one that rolled over from the Max Spares days to the Kone Spares, because
Okay.
that big dramatic shift in that entire organization, because Kone chose to discontinue providing the Mac door operators,
Okay.
sold that product line. So Kone Spares started as strictly spare parts, and then that was my world. So and at that time, that was shortly after they bought O&K, or the rest of O&K.
Mhm.
Well, I got all of the pending work for the O&K escalator parts that was in process at the time of the sale. So I had a crash course on the O&K products. So my escalator knowledge just continued to build over the years in that regard. So so I did that for, that was in 2000. And then I don't even remember what year it was. Just a few years later, became sales manager at Kone Spares, and held that role until 2013, when I left.
Okay. So how and talk to us a little bit about what you're doing now. When you say I left, did you go straight into what you're doing now,
No,
or
no, I went to ECS Corporation, which was a big risk for me. That was in 2013. We were doing so well at Kone Spares, and again, I attribute that a lot to John Jaster, but also a really great group of people, wonderful group of people. Really worked well together as a group and as a unit. And again, John announced his retirement, and shortly before that, I had been approached by the new owners of ECS. Now, ECS and Kone were competitors, because ECS actually did a very, very good thing, and they re-engineered some of the Montgomery products
okay,
that were, big sellers for Kone.
right?
And ECS did a great thing with that. They just didn't. The ownership at that time just didn't manage the results of what they got very well. So they sold their company, came under new ownership to non-industry people, more finance people, and they reached out to me and said, "Hey, would you ever consider coming on board?" And so, "Yeah, I don't think so, because I mean, admittedly, as a guy from Coney, I was like, "Yeah, I don't really like you people," I mean, yeah, that was the way we thought.
Sure.
And but I detected a sincerity there that was, they needed help,
Right.
and it was a different thing. It wasn't people doing bad things, or doing they got a company, and this was the daughter of an owner there that, frankly, they bought something they didn't know what to do with then.
Gotcha.
And so, I thought, I just got 32 years here. I just can't see this. This doesn't make sense. So my wife and I, we talked about it a little bit. Well, right in that time, my mother had passed away, so that put a pause on just about everything for a little bit, and then came back, and then those calls started up again. And I thought,
Mhm.
we've been really doing really well, and John's leaving, and this, if I'm ever going to do anything with a change, this might be the time. I had one daughter that was going to be getting married. My oldest daughter, my middle daughter, was getting ready to go to the University of Iowa, so out of state tuition to
Sure.
change. And my son was starting to drive, so okay, paying for insurance for a male driver. I was
Adding up.
yeah, so it was like, okay, if I'm going to do something now's the time to launch out and see what the heck happens.
Sure.
So I accepted that offer and went there and walked into really a heck of a hornet's nest that we were able to turn around relatively quickly. But we had to really reestablish a reputation and a different mindset, different culture. And that's where a lot of the things that I learned from Jaster came into play. Is suddenly I found myself sometimes talking like him.
Sure.
and emulating him without realizing it, I think. But we needed to make some hard changes there, and we did. And I entered in there as vice president of sales, and then I was shortly thereafter was named president of the company, and worked there for about 8.5 years. And philosophically, they were at a point where they needed to put some. I felt there was some investment in people in the company. We need to take a different approach to maybe making a few less things and outsourcing some more things to meet delivery schedules and such. But different dynamics that created a little bit of a philosophical shift. And I was concerned about the future. And in between there, all my kids came on board and started working for us.
Wow.
And so it wasn't just me. It was, this is something that they all got sucked into this industry now. And
It is a family industry, right?
yeah, and they love it, and it so now I was okay, started thinking, all right, this is primarily an escalator provider of escalator components. Now, when you start doing your market research and you figure that, 85%, give or take 1 or 2%, is elevators of the vertical equipment that's installed. And then you say, okay, of that balance, say of that 15% that's left, when it comes to providing the spare parts to that, all right, the lion's share is going to go to the OEMs because that's their equipment. Kone Spares is very good at what they do. Uniform for Otis, Adams for Schindler. So just throwing a number out with a moving target, that maybe leaves 4 to 5% of what's left for and that's a one-legged table to stand on. And so I had been pushing for them to look at maybe marketing the company a little bit and seeing, is there interest in this or expanding into other items.
Right.
And came into contact with some people that said, boy, you're right, Rick, so on and so forth, you could come here, you could come there. And so, some of the fits just didn't seem like the right fits. And I had some people encouraging me, okay, go start your own thing.
Right.
And I thought, well, it's a different kind of risk, but it was intriguing. So I knew I had several people that had called, and I knew I could I was going to land somewhere, but I thought until I figured out what I was going to do, let me just be done, and I'll take a little time and we'll figure this out. So I put in my notice, and all my kids were still there, and that was difficult for them. And that, so that was, they struggled with that a little bit. And, but I took about a month and then took the opportunity to go and be the chief operating officer for both Access Elevator in California and Quality Elevator in Chicago. They're sister companies.
Sure.
And, my task is to basically oversee both of those companies and build them, but also try to grow them together internally. to instead of operating as two separate companies, operate as a company where we can, and then represent two distinct offerings to the industry, in both just in not just the offerings, but also geographically. We'll change up a little bit about what we do and how we do it, and be a little bit better fit to the industry, I think. But and then since that time, all my kids are back on board with me here now too.
Okay.
Yeah, it's that's the that's the part that is really enjoyable for me, because this is, we are anything we do, we're going to go all in.
Sure.
And it's reflective that, okay, if we are in this company, or these two companies now technically, uh it's got to work, it's got to soar.
Sure.
I mean, you're talking livelihood, and it's, we're, I depend on them, they depend on me, and we've got just a fantastic group of people at both companies that we're just kind of getting in these boats and rowing in the same manner, in the same mode, in the same fashion, and it's a lot of fun. So
That's awesome. That's awesome. What do you love most about the elevator industry? Obviously, you've
it's the
been
people.
here.
It's the people. It's the people. I went to a seminar here a couple of weeks ago, put on by Echelon Front, and one of the questions that they ask is, "Hey, who here likes change?" Well, you know, most people don't like change, and although I don't go look for change, and I don't mind it, I do okay with it. And this
Sure.
industry is ever changing,
Sure.
and I think that's allowed me to be really open and receptive to whatever the industry throws our way, or whatever is thrown the industry's way, because it's a neat group of people. It's a very large industry, yet it's a very small
Sure.
collection of people and personalities, and it's a group of really good people.
Yeah.
That's the part that is, and again, certainly I'm biased, because I mean, from the time I was 16, that's the only industry I've done.
There's a reason you stayed. I mean, you obviously could have
Oh
jumped
yeah,
out of the industry at any point, but the reason you stayed sounds like it was the people.
yeah, and I think that was the reason. That's also one of the reasons I'm thrilled with my two daughters and my son being involved with it, that they get to experience these things.
Right.
My kids, they're involved in the next gen portion of
Cool.
the industry, which is, I think that's a critical piece
Mm.
of the industry, because I think the industry is kind of at a there's a little concern for me, because there's so many wonderful, experienced people that are out there in the industry that know so much, and they know how to do things.
Sure.
And I'm not talking about product wise. That's also critically important, and a part of that. But it's like, okay, who to talk to? How do you find your answers here? Wait a minute, don't do that. Let's call this guy.
Right.
They know how to network. They know how to, and they don't do it with an iPhone, and they don't do it, and granted, that's part of the world today, and and we have to use that. It's a part of the way we do business now, but it doesn't replace 50 years of knowledge.
Sure.
Um,
Yeah.
I'm one of the things I did for a short period of time when I was at Kone was do for new sales trainees. I would have to give tours and talk about certain things. And I specifically remember many years ago, one of them I said, the Mac operators. Well, one of them didn't know that was part of the Kone family at one time.
Right.
And because it's not made anymore, but there's
Sure.
still tons and tons of them out there. And okay, if you go out in sales, you're going to encounter this. And what do you do when you do encounter it? And I think there's so many people that they just know that.
Sure.
And other people they're not afraid to ask questions. But you got this group of people that, they're walking away from opportunities because they're just not cognizant of what's out there, or who does what, who provides what. So I'm excited about this next gen piece. Obviously, I'm a little older that I can't participate in it, but that's a neat group of people, and it's a wonderful thing that the industry is doing, and trying to connect that group to the industry, because it is the future of the industry. These are the future leaders of the
Sure,
industry.
sure. Yeah, like you say, obviously at some point, people retire, they move on, they take their knowledge with them, and so
Right.
keeping what is special about the industry alive, I would think needs to be a big priority for
Oh,
sure.
huge, huge. And I think also, I think, and this is a good problem to have, because I think it does infuse this world of technology that we have, just like what we're doing here, this wasn't done many years ago, not in this fashion.
Sure.
Yet, so there's so many pluses to that, but it's also, okay, how do you know what, pick up the phone and call somebody.
Yeah, it's an old-fashioned skill. My kids are
You
still
know?
trying to learn that,
Yeah,
right? They can
right,
text,
right.
but
Yeah, and I think, and you find, I think that's the other thing, and I go back to even back my early days at Montgomery, going to the branch network. And then after we took on those O&K products, when I was at Kone, I got thrust in front of New York City Transit
sure,
over some poor performance on the O&K things during the transition. And I was actually taken to Grand Central Station and watched rush hour traffic in the afternoon
wow,
with an escalator, or an escalator that was out of service. And having the opportunity to see people and see situations, go to job sites and see their faces, sit down with them at a lunch or a breakfast, it really goes a long way. And even though you don't do it all that frequently, I'm telling you, it builds a rapport there
sure,
that you want to help those people, and you can count on those people. I think that's one of the things that this industry, I guess, that I do like about it. If you look at the world today, it's kind of an ugly world. It's filled with angst,
sure,
people with their various political beliefs, and so many things that are very, very, have been made very divisive. And the crazy thing is, our industry is filled with those same people that have varying opinions and varying ideas, but they seem to be able to work together in a wonderful way that the rest of society hadn't figured out yet.
yeah,
And it's because it's really good people. And there's an understanding, even as competitors, in some things, that it's like, hey, yeah, yeah, I don't have that job, but you know what? I know who can help you.
sure.
And you just, you don't see that. I don't think. Maybe it exists other places, but I don't know. But
I've not seen it, and I've touched a lot of other industries and never found anything like that.
well, I love that. And one of the things I like to tell our people is like, hey, it's okay to lose an order. If you lose an order, that's fine. You know, it, let's figure out why we lost the order. We can get better. There's an opportunity to get better.
Sure.
Let's not be accused of not working hard on something. You know, and if you lose an order and you lose it to a competitor, you know what the crazy thing is? That competitor might be a supplier and it might be a customer all in one.
Sure.
You
Sure.
know, that's the crazy way this industry works, is you are a competitor, but you're a customer. In the same, you're calling the same guy for just, you're just wearing a different hat on that day.
True.
And it's wonderful. It's just
Yeah.
really, it's, so it makes it a lot of fun. There's a lot of rapport that gets built, and you can count on a lot of people. You don't need to know everything, but as long as you got a good number of contacts and relationships in the industry, you put it all together, most people, somehow you're going to get to know everything.
Sure.
And,
Sure. You're going to get a lot done, right? Working together.
and you're going to solve problems, and you're going to validate and enhance that appreciation for each other. So,
Absolutely. Yeah. No, I appreciate that. So we're running out of time, but I do want to ask you just one, I guess, final question as we wrap up. And biggest thing I would want to know is what is, one lesson that you've learned throughout your career that you'd like to share with listeners, things that, something that's made a huge difference for you.
Don't ever burn bridges. Not in this industry. And I don't think too many people do, because just as I made mention, you're going to need help somewhere, somehow. And, be decent, be kind, do everything above table. And it'll all be okay. I mean, it's, there's things that are, there's things to really stress over and a lot of things to not, and I guess to segue to that. And again, part of this is where, for me at this point in my life, I put in a ton of hours. I'm doing a lot of traveling back and forth to California, Chicago, and I don't, it's hard, but it's okay. But it's what I do.
Sure.
Not who I am. It's what I do. And that's one of the things I think that for anybody in or out of this industry, your job is what you do. I on a very personal note, losing both parents over the year, I've lost a brother that at an early age, and many people have had many harsh things happen in life.
Sure.
That put things into perspective. And, you go home to the more important part of your life, and you should appreciate that. And yet, when you are at the office or when you are at work, okay, half of your waking hours are there. You should enjoy it, embrace it. Do you need to be friends with everybody? No, you don't need to be friends with everybody, but you can be friendly.
Sure.
And I just think it's keeping things into perspective, and yeah, do I take things really, really serious? You bet I do. I mean, that's the job. And I expect other people to as well, but not to the point where it compromises their personal life. They need to go home and be a mom, be a dad, be a husband and wife, whatever their role is. It's more important than what they're going to do for me.
Right. Perfect. Thank you. No, I appreciate that. I appreciate your time. Appreciate the conversation, and wish you the very best as you continue to merge those two together and continue to build your business.
I appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Rick. Thank you for listening to the Elevator Careers podcast, sponsored by the Allred Group, a leader in elevator industry recruiting. You can check us out online at elevatorcareers.net. Please subscribe, and until next time, stay safe.